So continuing on, what we're going to do is use the Hello World application that we created in the last section. So I'm just going to click in here in IntelliJ and open that up. And we're going to make some changes. So what I'm going to do is make a bit more room on the screen so we can see what we're doing. I'm going to get rid of the project section because we don't need that. And also I'm going to run it once by clicking on the little green arrow as you saw me click. And I'm going to make sure we've got some space here so we can see what we're doing. So we're going to be typing commands on the left hand side, and on the right hand side we're going to be able to see what the results of running those commands are. So if your system is compacted like this is a feature of IntelliJ, and if there's only one statement, it does what's called code folding, and it puts it all onto the one line. So all you need to do is just click into somewhere in there. In this case I'm clicking just before the word system, and I'm going to press enter or return on my computer. And I've now got space to start typing my commands. So let's start talking about variables. Now a variable is something that makes a computer program very useful. So what is a variable? Well, a variable is a place in memory, think about it like a box if you will, that you can store something in. And the computer allows you to have hundreds or thousands of boxes, each containing their own pieces of information. So what we do with a variable, that's what it's called in Java. That box is called a variable. And what we can do is we can assign the type of information that we want to put into the boxes, and we can also give it a name. So why would we want to use variables? Well, the reason that we want to use them is because they make a program really useful. If, for example, if there was a computer program that you wanted to create that helped calculate someone's current age based on the date, then of course you'd need to enter in their birthday, and the computer would need to store that somewhere so it could then calculate how old that person was. Without the ability to store something, the computer wouldn't be able to process anything, and the programs you create would be very, very basic and not really useful. So a variable is used for that purpose, to store information. Now as we move forward with the course, we'll be talking about lots of different types of data, but we're going to start off with a really basic one that's included in Java, and it's called the int, which is short for an integer. So an integer in math terms is a whole number without any decimal points, and it's the same thing in Java. So what we need to do is, if we want to use variables, we need to define what's called the data type, then we need to assign a name to it, and optionally we need to also define a value to it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go to the end of the line and press enter. I'm going to assign a new variable, and I'm going to type int, all in lowercase, int space, I'm going to call it my first number, and put equals 5, and then I'm going to put a semicolon on the end of it. Then once you do that, Java knows that everything on that line is something that it needs to process and figure out what you mean. So the first part of that line, and I'll just make a bit more space here, first part here, int, that's what's called the data type. So we're telling Java, please assign a box or an area in memory, to be more precise, that will be able to store an integer, an int number. And I'm going to call that box or that memory location my first number. And then by using the equals and a number on the end, what I'm doing is I'm saying, and I want you to assign the value of 5 to it. Now the good thing about a variable is that because of its very nature, it can be changed. So we can assign a number to it, and then we can assign another number to it down the track, and we can continually change it. But what we've done with this first line is we've said, at the moment, I want you to assign the value 5 to our integer, which has got the name my first number. And Java's quite happily assigned that, and what we can do is we can then print that out if we want to, just to confirm that that area, that my first number contains the right amount. I can type system, capital S, system. You notice then I made a mistake. IntelliJ is following along and showing us options below what I'm typing. Couldn't find what I meant, so that's a good indication that I typed something wrong. I'm going to press backspace and type system dot out dot println. Now that's one way of doing it. I could have gone all that entire line like that, but there is actually abbreviation in IntelliJ. And if I type in SOUT, and you can see what's happened there. This is actually a template that's built into IntelliJ, and that's an abbreviation. So if I now press the tab key, IntelliJ will print the whole line out for me, which is very nice. So you can see in the first print line at the very top where it's got Hello Tim, that actually outputted to the right hand side Hello Tim. What would we need to type in this box where the cursor is, in the two brackets in between the brackets, to print out my first number? So pause the video here and see if you can figure out how to get the system to print that first number. Come back and press play once you've done that and see what the solution was. So how did you go? Did you figure it out? Well, to actually get it to print something, we need to type in the name of the variable. And we're saying to Java, this is the box, if you will, or this is the variable that I want you to print the contents from. So in this case, I just type in my first number, and I can just press enter if I can see that the selection that IntelliJ is showing me is enough, and press enter. And you can see that that's accepted it, there's no errors. And I can click on over here to the green arrow to run. So you can see what's happened now is Java has printed the first statement, the Hello Tim, which was from a previous video when we made that change, but it's also printed the number 5. So that line system.out.println, my first number, it didn't actually print the text my first number, but rather what happened was because we put my first number there, so Java knew that that was a variable, and it went in and figured out and had a look at what is in that memory location, or what was in that box, if you will, what was the value of that variable, and it printed out the value, not the name. So if we went back then and made a change, and made the value 10 there, and run the program again, we actually get the value 10. So each time we use that, we assign that statement, if you will, Java is automatically looking at the variable name and looking into the area of memory that contains the value and printing out the value. Now, we're not limited to just putting a number like that. We can actually put a mathematical expression there. For example, we could put 10 and use plus, the plus sign, and say 5. And you can probably guess what that answer is going to be. We'll run it. The answer is 15. And that's because Java looked at the expression 10 plus 5 and said, well, that's 15. It put 15 into the variable and saved that into that memory location. Now, these mathematical processes can get quite complex. They're literally like a scientific calculator. We can introduce brackets if we wanted to. We can put 10 plus 5 plus 2 times 10. So in theory, that should be 10 plus 5 is 15, plus 2 times 10 is 20. So it should be 15 plus 20, so our answer should be 35 when we run it. And you can see that the answer we're showing is 35. Now, what do you think would happen if I copy this line? So I'm going to copy that entire line and I'm going to paste it. What will happen if I do this? So what I've done is I've taken the variable name of my first number, but I've surrounded it in double quotes. And the hint there is that it changed to green. You notice much like the first print line with the Hello Tim, it changed to green. What do you think will happen in there? Do you think it'll print out the number 35 or will it print out my first number? Let's run it and see what will happen. And you can see what's happened there is because we've specified double quotes, we've told Java, this is not a variable, this is actually a string. And we want you to print whatever is in there and not to try and decipher that as a variable, but just to print it out as it was. So in this case, literally, all it did was printed whatever was in the double quotes. So generally speaking, if you see something in double quotes, that's not a variable, that's going to be treated by the computer as just a string, as literally whatever you want to type in there. And I could put something else in there, my second number, which obviously we haven't got a variable called my second number. We could run that and it just prints out my second number because there's no relationship to the variable there and what we're typing in double quotes. So let's go ahead and create a second variable. I'm going to call it int my second number. Equals, number equals 12. And I'm going to put int my third number equals 6. And I'm going to delete that second line there. And then I'm going to put int my total equals, I can put my first number plus my second number plus my third number. So what's going to happen there is the computer comes along and assigns my first number the value, in this case 35. My second number is assigned the value of 12. And my third number is assigned the value of 6. And my total is then assigned the value of the first number, which was 35. Second number, which is 12. Third number, which is 6. So if we then go to print out my third number, I'm just going to copy and paste that. We should get the value of 35 for that line, plus 12 is 47, plus 6 is 53. So let's run that. And why did it come up with 6? Well, that's because I actually printed out my third number, which is the value of 6, and not my total. And this is another good thing that IntelliJ will come up and tell you, is if you see a variable that's grayed out like that, and if you just hover your mouse over it, it actually gives you a hint and says, well, look, my total is never used. Like so, and it says variable, my total is never used. So in other words, the computer was smart enough to figure out that, okay, you've set up this variable, but it hasn't been used anywhere. So if I then go ahead and copy that and paste that into the line to print out, that isn't grey anymore because IntelliJ has quite correctly figured out, okay, you're now using that. So now if we run this, we should get the value of 53. So as you can see, it can be really quite complex. One last thing I'm going to do is change this a little bit. You can even do something like my third number equals my first number times 2. So therefore the value would be 35 for the first line, 12 for the second line, but then my third number is the first line's value, which was we decided was 35 times 2. So that line would be 70. So it would be 35 plus 12 is 47 plus 70 is 117. So if we now run this, we should get the value of 117. And you can see we've got a value of 117. So let's end with a challenge. So how would you define a new variable that had the difference between 1,000 and the current value of my total? So in other words, how would you assign that variable that it figured out that whatever the total was, whatever the value in my total was, to take that from 1,000 and to show the value from that and then to print that out on the screen. Go ahead and do that. Pause the video here and then come back when you're ready and we'll have a look at the solution. So how did you go? Did you figure it out? Well, to actually do that, we can type a new variable. We can type int my last one equals, and it's simply a matter of putting 1,000, take my total. So that will then look at the number 1,000, deduct from it my total, and leave us a value, which in this case should be the difference between 1,000 and 117, which is 883 if my math is correct. So what we can do is we can actually change this now, paste that in there, and if we run that, we'll actually run it. There we go, that's the value of 883. Now just a note before I finish this video, case sensitivity is very important here. Now I actually made a typo there. Generally speaking, when you're creating new Java variables, they should start with a lowercase m. Now the point I want to show you here is by changing the variable name to what it should be, which is starting with a lowercase number, you now get an error, and that's because if you type it in uppercase. And that's because Java is case sensitive when it comes to typing your commands. That's very much a common source of problems when you're learning a new language, is to get the syntax wrong, in other words, to type a word wrong, but also to not type it in the right case. So as you can see there, because I changed this to a lowercase m, now from a human perspective, that's so obvious that, okay, well, isn't that the same thing? Because it's clearly, it says my last one. No, it's not the same thing as far as the computer is concerned, because the m here is an uppercase m, and that's a lowercase m. So I need to go back and change that to a lowercase m, and by doing that, that fixes the error. So do make sure you check that out. That's a very common cause of errors, and if you see something highlighted like that in red, that's usually a good indication that there's an error with your typing, and you can hover your mouse over it, and it will usually tell you what the error is. In this case, cannot resolve symbol my last one. And what that is saying is it cannot find a symbol, or actually a variable in this case, called my last one. If we change it to lowercase m, it now matches the variable name that I've assigned on the previous line, and it will work. So that's the integer data type. We've now learnt the basics about that. In the next video, we're going to start looking at some other data types and how to mix and match those and take our results to the next level. So I'll see you in that next video.